finally, you want to make sure that your narrative gives a sense of why this literacy matters to you. You can do this throughout your narrative, indicate your feelings, reflect on things that have happened to you and lessons that you've learned. And at the end of your narrative, you can explain, like a conclusion to a paper, why the literacy matters to you, how it has changed you, how it makes your life better, whatever it is. Include some of that reflection in the story. So we can see some examples throughout all of the literacy narratives of this. Sometimes we see it throughout the narrative, in the body of the paper, like in Matt de la Peña's essay. He tells us early on, "I'd never read a book in 2 days, and it made me feel smart, an important piece of the puzzle." So that is him reflecting on something that has happened in the past, and he interjects to tell us what he now understands about it better, why this reading experience mattered. It made him feel smart for once. But then there's another piece that he now understands better, and so he can tell us about that. Even more surprisingly, though, when I turned the last page, I found myself on the verge of tears. I was shocked. How could black and white on a page make me feel so emotional? I was a tough kid from a tougher family. I hadn't shed a tear since elementary school, and here I was, choked up from a book. And so we see that this is an emotional journey for Matt, that for the first time he realizes the power of literature, how it can move you, even if it is just words on a page. And so throughout the narrative, he tells the story, he gives us some conversations, but he also interjects with feelings and interpretation of what has happened to him. We can also see this at the conclusion of a narrative, where the writer can kind of reflect back on everything they've told us throughout their narrative and then tell us why it matters. We see this with Nicole Miles when she's come to the realization that Black representation matters. She didn't understand that at first, but she came to that point, and it's affected who she is as a person and as an artist. She actually tells us, "I couldn't articulate it at the time," but she can now, and that's what the literacy narrative can help you to do. Putting words down on paper, and in the case of Nicole, images too. Sometimes you understand something better than you ever did before. You can see it in a new way because writing it made you look at it differently. So I couldn't articulate it at the time, she tells us. This was the start of a realization that the lack of media representation of people who looked like me affected me, even if I wasn't initially aware of it. And it wasn't enough to be represented in just one way. Regardless of how positive that representation seems, it was necessary to have visual representation from lots of different perspectives. It's unfortunate, she tells us. Despite growing up in a majority Black country, I still struggled to find artistic representations that I connected with people like me shown as the norm. But it's empowering to know that I can help draw them into the picture. And so her journey as an artist has allowed her to understand something about herself, about the world around her, and how she can create change, both within herself and in her art. She gives that to the world to increase representation. She has a say, she has something to contribute. And so at the conclusion of her narrative, she's able to really drive home why this literacy matters, why her journey, what she's learned, matters. We can also see this in literacy and hip hop. So I won't read through the whole paragraphs here because I realize this video is getting a little bit long, but we do have some really important reflections at the end, where Wicker tells us that she's discovered that she lives a kind of dual existence, and that there's this us and them, and this way that she needs to learn to code switch to find balance in her different worlds, and that this is something she's learned about. So it's not just that she learned to write hip hop. but it's that she learned to live in a pretty complex way. She tells us that while in the world of they, white people, we tend to change how we speak so that we seem smarter. We don't quote rap lyrics in conversation. I was made to feel as though hip hop was something only sacred to us and should be kept private from them. Right? She didn't want to have to live that way, to hide part of herself. And her family had been sort of giving her the idea that she needed to do that or she wouldn't be taken seriously. But she finds her own path. She tells us, I came to realize later that my love for rap music never prevented me from articulating a thought or solving a math problem. It has never stopped me from appreciating all genres of music and eventually writing within them. It also has never prevented me from making friends or falling in love, right? So she found out a lot about herself throughout this journey. And at the end of the narrative, that's what she wants to leave us with, that message of how hip hop, she says, has helped shape who I am and how I inspire the future through my children. So what do you want to say at the end of your narrative? What do you want the reader to take away from your journey? What did you learn? And what can your reader learn from you? So now it's time to tell your story. It doesn't have to include everything I've just talked about, but I do want you to think about the narratives you've read and the strategies that these writers use to make their stories come to life, and find a way that you can tell your literacy narrative so that it's not just a diary entry for you, because you remember what it was like. You can fill all of the details in mentally, but your reader can't. I can't. I wasn't there with you. And so I need you to show me, I need you to describe to me what it was like as you learned this skill. And you need to tell me why it mattered to you and what it has taught you. And I hope that this will be a process that maybe even helps you understand how this literacy has affected you even better too. And so this first essay is meant to be one where don't worry about the structure. Don't worry about writing something perfect. Just tell me your story. One word at a time, just start. If you're having trouble along the way or you just want my opinions on something, ask me questions, email me, come to Zoom office hours, whatever it is that you need. And one key thing is try not to stress. This is your story. You've got this.